I'm Jess Unger. I'm a first-year master's student in the Public Humanities program here at Brown.
And I'm Reusche. I'm also a first-year master's student at the Public Humanities program.
A little bit about why Brown students are in an anthropology museum. It's not the traditional thing for anthropology museums to discover. And I have to say, it was a little bit controversial for the museum staff when students proposed doing an exhibit about Brown students in an anthropology museum. But I was actually sort of pleased with the idea. One of the things that anthropology museums worry a lot about is to what extent they should be talking about other people all the time. Anthropologists worry a lot about just displaying exotic peoples from around the world in the museum. And so the notion of saying, let's look at Brown students as exotic people too, or let's look at people around the world as just like us, seemed like a very appealing idea. So what we're trying to do here is to treat the study of Brown student culture like we would treat the study of Mayan culture over there, or Inuit culture over there, or Haitian voodoo culture over there. The idea is to try to get folks to step back and think about what's culture, how do we understand ourselves better, how do we understand the rest of the world better by comparing these things. To keep the museum staff happy to have this in here, because most of the objects you see are not from the Haffenreffer collections, but from the Brown University archives. We have a piece here where we try to show the same set of categories applied to other things from the museum. So this is an experiment, and the whole point of the Haffenreffer Museum is to let students try things out, experiment, give them a chance to learn, to think about the notion of museums, the notion of culture. So this was an experiment to apply anthropological ideas to a fairly commonplace, everyday, right here on campus kind of audience. So with that, I will turn it over to Sarah and Jess, who can tell you more about it, and then ask questions and try out some of the activities.
Thanks, so Jess and I were part of about a dozen students in the Public Humanities master's program who worked on this exhibit from beginning to end. And if Public Humanities sounds a little cryptic, a little bit of background is that Public Humanities describes the work of individuals and institutions who connect traditional academic disciplines with the public. So this goes from art museums and public art to public history and what universities do. So it's a very interdisciplinary group of students. We come from all different backgrounds. And you'll see that this is not strictly an anthropology exhibit. We talk a bit about performance and history. And so it is a bit different than what you see around here.
So, as Sarah was saying, we're coming from lots of different backgrounds, so we took kind of an unconventional approach to the Anthropology Museum. And we wanted to use this space as a place to talk about culture broadly. So we have some historical objects, some archaeological objects as well. But it was just kind of a fun experiment to see how many different ways we could use objects to talk about what it was to be a Brown student in the past and today. So what we wanted to do with this exhibit was to use a familiar culture, as Steve was saying, as sort of a springboard to understand how anthropology museums tell stories about people through objects, and hopefully provide visitors with a lens of understanding the rest of the exhibits after seeing something that was familiar to themselves. And so basically we started off this process. We felt a little overwhelmed at first. The idea of putting this familiar culture in a case seemed like a rather large task. So we approached it by coming into the Manning Hall Gallery here and looking around at some of the other objects on display and seeing how the Haffenreffer has approached different cultures. So based off of this, we were able to sort of create these different categories that we could use to explore our own exhibit.
And so some of these categories are, well, we found 3 categories, which does not describe how all objects are used to talk about culture. But the 3 we focused on were objects that show an identity within a community and that relates to a community, which is our first section. Our next section is called Talking Trash, and it's about how we understand a culture through its remnants and its leftovers, whether that's archaeology, and looking at very old objects, to collecting contemporary garbage, basically. And we also went into the archives to look at how the administration chooses to save certain objects to tell a specific story about the university, and we call that the official record. And so after we made these categories of objects for how we look at Brown's culture, we then went into the Haffenreffer's extraordinary collections in Bristol to use them as a resource and find corollary objects from across cultures that work very much the same way as our Brown objects to tell a story. And so we have things like the Yurok headdress over there with the feathers sticking out of the top. Is a hat that girls wear in a puberty initiation in which they become a woman, and though it looks very different than our 1919 freshman beanie from Brown right here, it really serves a very similar purpose, to wear a hat to show that you are part of a community and you're becoming part of the community. We also had a cuneiform tablet from Egypt that was a record of somebody's how much gold and silver they had, and this was an official record, much like what we have in the archives. And it's really important to have access to these kinds of written records to learn about people. And then our last category is the archaeology of the Taino people, which was indigenous people on the island of Haiti that became extinct practically. And so all we really know about the Taino people and their culture, we learned from what they left behind. It's all from archaeology and looking at their garbage, much like our talking trash section.
So we realized that this exhibit can only talk about very small portions of Brown student culture, and that was what we really liked about it. And we kind of realized that the exhibit was almost just as much about what was in the cases as what was left out of them. So as a part of this process, we tried to create spaces for visitors to leave their own comments on what they would like to see in an exhibit on Brown student culture and what they've experienced, either as Brown students as alum, or as people that have some sort of affiliation with the school. So you see we have these little sheets over there. People have been contributing their own feedback about what they would want to put in the cases. Then we also have a Facebook page where we encourage people to post on the wall and say what they would like to see, maybe upload photos of certain objects, or even photos themselves and see what they're